Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. It's been quite a start to 2025. We've got a new, or rather returning president in the US who is threatening a trade war with Canada, even as Trump is once again pursuing mass deportation of migrants and refugees out of the US. And here in Canada, we're about to get a new prime minister with Justin Trudeau's resignation. The bureaucracy in Ottawa is essentially frozen with their prorogation announcement, and even the new Liberal prime minister, whoever that might be, is likely to have an abbreviated tenure, with the opposition parties threatening a non-confidence vote as soon as Parliament returns, triggering a federal election. On top of that, we've had 3 provincial elections in 2024 and are scheduled to have 2 more provincial and 2 territorial elections in 2025. That is a lot of political and economic upheaval. All Canadians, but especially nonprofits, will have to adapt to the shifting political landscape and impacts on our economy and society. In our last episode, we talked to government relations experts about how to navigate the enormous changes, and now we want to hear from Canadian charities and nonprofits. We want to understand what they're experiencing on the ground and drill down on their deepest concerns and their strategies on how to navigate this ever-changing landscape to survive and thrive into the future. To help us understand some of the challenges and anticipated trends, please welcome Olga Stachova. How did I do? I don't think I did very well. I'm going to do something here. I'm going to pick that up at Olga Stachova. Is that okay? Okay, I'm going to pick it up there. We'll do a little edit in the video. Okay, in 3, 2, 1. To help us understand some of the challenges and anticipated trends, please welcome Olga Stachova, the CEO of MOSAIC, a registered charity serving immigrant, refugee, migrant, and mainstream communities in Metro Vancouver, the Fraser Valley, as well as throughout the province of BC. Its broad range of services include settlement support, English language training, employment assistance, and family services, among others. As one of the largest immigrant-serving organizations, MOSAIC serves over 30,000 clients annually from 47 accessible locations in Greater Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. Olga has over 20 years of experience managing nonprofit organizations, as well as operational expertise in program design, delivery, and evaluation, along with a proven track record of building strategic partnerships among diverse stakeholder groups. Welcome to the podcast, Olga.
Thank you for having me.
We'd love to start by learning a bit more about your organization and the services you provide. Could you give us a bit of an overview?
Sure. As you mentioned, MOSAIC is one of Canada's largest immigrant-serving organizations, providing a wide range of services to over 30,000 newcomers annually. We serve clients from over 150 countries of origin, so it is a true mosaic. Individuals and families who came either as permanent residents or temporary residents. And our services are really to substitute and to provide that social and professional network that newcomers leave behind in their home countries. Our services include initial settlement supports and connections to local resources, English language training and testing, employment counseling and training, leadership programs, interpretation, translation, as well as many more specialized supports for specific population groups, whether it's children, youth, seniors, or LGBTQI plus newcomers.
Well, many organizations in Canada are reporting an unprecedented rise in the demand for services. Is that something that your organization is experiencing?
That's absolutely right. As the other service providers noted, we also see incredible increase in interest in services. And many of our programs have long waiting lists. In particular, the federally funded language training programs. As you can imagine, when you're new to the country, your first priority is to find a job and achieve economic stability. And strong language skills are so essential for newcomers' ability to find jobs, participate in training programs, and function in this new society.
Well, across Canada, we've certainly seen unprecedented political change with numerous provincial elections, as well as political upheaval federally. There was a close election outcome in BC just last year. Has your organization or your clients' organizations been impacted by this political uncertainty? Are there concerns about funding?
Yeah, so our clients have most certainly been impacted, and so have organizations like MOSAIC by the changing political landscape and the narrative that is playing out on the national political stage. We know that as a country, we face a number of serious challenges. We have seen the cost of living go up. We have seen severe shortages of housing, particularly affordable housing, challenges accessing healthcare. And unfortunately, in this discourse, immigrants have been often painted in the public discourse as the source of these challenges, which is a sentiment that is very misplaced and honestly dangerous and harmful, as it goes hand in hand in the steep increase in incidents of racism and hate experienced by newcomers every day, and the significant change in public sentiment towards immigration that we've seen over the past year. And then, of course, we've seen the federal government respond to these sentiments and dramatically reduce immigration levels planned for the next 3 years. And while some adjustments to our immigration policies and targets were needed and expected, I think everyone was surprised with just how large these reductions were and the number of policies introduced to deter people from coming to Canada. So we changed from a country who was proud to broadcast to the world how welcoming we are of immigrants and how appreciated and essential they are, to a country that is actively trying to discourage people from coming here, putting more and more obstacles in the way. And of course, the immigration targets directly inform the budgets available for immigrant services, which led to very drastic funding cuts that we've recently seen. And the sector is understandably bracing itself for new cuts amid political changes and fiscal realities across the country. So the impact really on our clients and organizations is twofold. On one hand, there is cuts to funding that will reduce services available. And again, as on the topic of language, one of that is a very prominent changes is access to higher level language classes that equip newcomers with professional language competencies required for jobs and further skills training. And these are planned to be completely discontinued by 2026. So there is the reduction of services on one side, and it's all compounded by the negative rhetoric and the scapegoating of newcomers that causes real harm and fear in the newcomer communities. We are repeatedly hearing from our clients that they are not feeling safe in Canada anymore. And this unease extends to our staff, and not only staff at MOSAIC and immigrant serving sector, the staff in not-for-profit sector who are often immigrants themselves. And their well-being and their safety is also impacted by this rhetoric.
There's no question, and we've certainly seen a rise in it in the United States, south of the border with this new presidency, and it's certainly a fear that this will have a significant impact on societal kind of norms, even in Canada, notwithstanding our history of being welcoming to immigrants. You've mentioned the obstacles that are now in place that immigrants are facing, and based on policy, I wonder, could you give an example or two of what those might be?
So there is a lot of changes to temporary residents. You might have seen that Canada is trying to decrease the overall number of temporary residents to 5% of the population. And that is done by decreasing number. We've heard a lot about international students, but there's a lot of policies that come around restricting eligibility to apply for work visas. For work with us for spouses. So if you come as an international student or you come as a temporary worker, your spouse will be limited whether or not they can work. And just imagine the cost of living in our country. If you come here and only one individual is able to work, you can't survive. So policies like this will make Canada a country that is no longer attractive. And I think for a long time, we in Canada thought that everyone wants to come here and we can choose and pick and choose who should come. And we've been able to do that, but we should not take it for granted. People can see and we already see people either leaving because they can't survive due to the cost of living, or people changing plans, not coming to Canada, not actually choosing Canada as their destination. So we should be also careful about the reputation.
It's very interesting. We're also interested in hearing from organizations about whether they're doing government relations work, particularly now, and whether it's being exacerbated by the circumstances that we're seeing politically and socially. Is that something your organization engages in? And if so, do you have any? Maybe you could describe first what what you're working on, and as well, then we can talk about any tips that you might have for other organizations.
Yeah, so MOSAIC engages very actively in government relations work. We take advantage of many of the formal consultation processes that exist at both provincial federal levels on variety of topics that impact immigration. And we actively participate in the annual budget consultations, flagging any gaps or needs we see in services or funding. But majority of our government relations work is really about building relationships with elected officials and with senior staff at the various ministries. And we create ample opportunities for them to see firsthand our services, to come, to visit, to hear directly from our clients. And we are also in regular conversation to flag any new trends or gaps that we observe in the communities. So our government relations work is not necessarily about securing funding for MOSAIC. It's really mainly about becoming a trusted advisor and the ear on the ground for the government, helping inform policies and think through the impact of policies and practices on the immigrant communities. And we find that elected officials are really appreciative and responsive to this type of partnership. But we also recognize the power of collective voice. Like, yes, MOSAIC has certain relationships. We do speak and advocate, but we also make sure that our subject matter experts participate in those countless working groups, advisory committees, advocacy groups that focus on social justice topics. And it's not just a very effective tool to bring MOSAIC's and immigrant communities' voice to these tables, but it also contributes to our staff's engagement and satisfaction. As I said, most of our staff have lived experience as immigrants and refugees, and they have a very strong interest in advocating for these communities and being agents of change.
And what do you think, if you were to provide any tips or other sorts of advice for other organizations, perhaps who might be actually embarking on government relations work perhaps for the first time, what would be your first advice to them?
It's just like taking the time to do it. It is, and I understand for social service provider organization, we're just so busy delivering. And the structures of our funding don't really give us the flexibility to do other things, to do the relationship building piece, whether it's with government, whether it's with employers and other sectors, industry sectors. But it's finding the time and making sure it is a priority, and building those relationships. I think that is just so important, and having opportunities for elected officials to see your work firsthand and to talk to your clients. We often find that, yes, I can meet with decision makers and I can deliver a message, but it's way more impactful when the message is delivered by clients. It's unscripted and the clients actually can communicate the needs directly. So as we do the work, and as much as I take the time to do the work, just make sure you provide the space for the community you serve. You bring them to you create the opportunities. There is such an appetite and such an interest to share the lived experience. And there's no better way to deliver that message than by people who live through it. So take the moment and provide those opportunities to your clients. We found that there's incredible interest.
Well, of course, we've mentioned the impact of the US election, and it's certainly already impacted Canada. And you've talked about that in some respects, both economically, but also socially. Now, if Trump actually decides to impose tariffs and Canada reciprocates, economists say it could lead to a recession. Is that something your organization or your member organizations are concerned about? And what are you doing to prepare for the worst case scenario?
We are very, very concerned. I think we are all watching with unease the divisive and the hostile rhetoric south of the border. We are absolutely concerned about the impacts on tariffs on a Canadian economy, on industries, given that most of our companies are small and medium enterprises. We are concerned about potential loss of jobs, increasing competition, and making it even more difficult for those who have been historically marginalized to find meaningful employment. We are concerned about the fear and the harm caused by the anti-immigrant rhetoric, policies, and actions. And honestly, our hearts go out to the people who spend their lives contributing to the U.S. economy and are now being turned away and expected to return to the countries they fled with no concern to the danger that they might face there. And it is honestly horrifying to watch how this powerful country is turning its back to basic human rights. So like it's hard. You have to have your eyes open. It's hard to prepare for everything that comes. There is, of course, we are looking at preparing and potentially expecting increased arrivals from U.S. People who historically would seek refuge in U.S. or seek asylum might decide not to do that and come to Canada. So certainly lots to think about.
Well, you're certainly right in terms of it's come with breakneck speed, really, with these uh, actually beginning the efforts of mass deportation of migrant refugees, and even using Guantanamo as a holding center, and other areas around the world. It certainly has experts suggesting that Canada will see an increase in asylum claims, as well as more interest in Canada as a potential destination when emigrating. And you've mentioned that you anticipate that. What have you heard and what have you experienced on the ground?
So we've already heard from some of our partner organizations that people who were in the U.S. and they were considering making asylum claim in BC are expediting this process, are initiating this process. We are also hearing about individuals starting to come to Canada on visitor visas, especially individuals from the LGBTQI communities. Um, we are quite concerned about the lack of capacity to manage the increased arrivals, especially if it is around seeking asylum. Our legal aid is already backlogged. It's taking refugee claimants 2 to 3 months to make a claim for asylum. And with the potential increased arrivals, the length can extend significantly. We see backlog at the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada, the independent administrative tribunal that is responsible for making decisions who receives refugee protection. We see our shelters already full. We are very close contact with shelters across Metro Vancouver, and they constantly report that more than half of the clients using shelters are refugee claimants, are people who are coming to this country to seek asylum and escape persecution. And so we lack the capacity for the initial emergency housing upon arrival. And this will become especially problematic when we start seeing families arrive. Because when individuals arrive, they could go to shelters for men or women. When you see families arriving, they will need to be separated to be able to even use shelters. So there's a lot of additional trauma and harm that can happen. So certainly lots to prepare for and think about.
And I assume that's part of some of your government relations work in terms of making this sort of critical message known to those that would seek um, uh, to be elected and put in power.
No, absolutely. And, in BC, we are very fortunate that we have a strong support and funding from the provincial government support refugee claimants, and which is not the case across the country. So, in that case, I think BC is more prepared because we already have the infrastructure funding in place.
And in your experience, how are newcomers in Canada engaging with the nonprofit sector? Are they? You've mentioned that they're not getting the enough support. That there's this incredible need, um, and we know numbers such as Hunger Count survey indicated that 32% of food bank users are newcomers to Canada who have been in the country for 10 years or less. Uh, I wonder if you could speak to that. I mean, this is clearly not just a new problem, it's an ongoing one.
You know, Canada has a strong infrastructure to support newcomers, and it's not just the immigrant serving organizations, but we do have robust networks of social service organizations, neighborhood houses, who provide a wide range of services. But it is not only not-for-profits and their programs that contribute to the success and financial stability of newcomers. I think the biggest challenge we as a society have is our inability to recognize the international experience and the qualifications of newcomers so that they don't have to work multiple survival jobs and rely on food banks. And we have a long way to go. Study after study shows that only about 40% of newcomers find jobs that are commensurate to their education experience. This is a huge waste of talent that we as a country can ill afford, not to speak about the hardship that presents for newcomers who come to Canada with the expectation that their education and experience will be valued as it was in the immigration process. Um, so while our governments are working to make credential recognition more streamlined, I think it is up to us as employers to revisit our hiring strategies and ensure that we remove the unintended barriers and biases that may prevent newcomers from accessing employment at our organizations. For those interested, MOSAIC has recently completed two interesting research studies. One is around discrimination of internationally trained medical graduates and the barriers they face in accessing residencies and practicing as family physicians. And the other really examining the opportunities for newcomers to not just get the first job, but grow their careers in Canada. And the report that is called Beyond the First Job, and it's available on our website, is literally looking at newcomer representation in senior leadership positions in BC, in particular with the BC top 100 employers, and finding that only 7% of executive leaders are immigrants. Only 4% are racialized immigrants, and less than 1% are racialized immigrant women. So definitely a long way to go as a society, as an employers, to ensure that newcomers have equal opportunities to succeed professionally, and they have the financial stability that they all seek.
I want to switch gears a little bit here and maybe look at the flip side of the relationships between newcomers to Canada and nonprofit organizations. Is there an opportunity for organizations to build relationships with newcomers to Canada in terms of becoming future donors, future volunteers? You know, is there a way to actually flip this slightly to I guess get better outcomes and both in term for the organization but also the newcomer?
Yeah, and so again, before we even want to focus on newcomers as potential donors, just if we could all reflect on our role in supporting them in gaining financial stability and successful careers, setting up for the success that will allow them contribute financially one day to the organizations and communities that welcome them and support them. As I mentioned earlier, newcomers represent such a wealth of experience and talent, which is largely untapped and underutilized. So there's a lot that we as organizations can definitely do to support. I could mention some calls to action to all of us. Um, you know, I I would ask our sector and all industry sectors to review our hiring practices, to really look at the potential barriers and consider whether our shortlist of candidates as we are hiring represent truly the demographic of the regions we serve. When you look at Metro Vancouver, 50% of candidates are newcomers. So your shortlist and your workforce should reflect this. We should all examine our practices for promotions. Are newcomers being considered for promotions as frequently as Canadian-born employees? Are newcomers represented in your management teams and your leadership? I think if we can do that, if we can all get together behind allowing that and bridging the key barriers, one of them lack of Canadian work experience, and be those employers who provide that for newcomers. And lots of not-profits do, like a lot of newcomers start jobs in not-for-profit sector, and not-for-profit sector employees, when you look at the statistics, are predominantly newcomers. So how do we provide that first Canadian job experience to help them grow their careers beyond that? I think, again, we can look at government, we can look at funding, but the main role is the role we as employers play.
Well, looking ahead, given the unprecedented demand for service that many organizations are currently facing, I'm curious about your views on sustainability. Do we need new models and new funding? It seems to me that it will be necessary going forward, and I'd like to know what your view is, particularly around. I'm assuming that the funding is necessary, but what about new models, new ways of working that we have to examine and experiment with?
And you're absolutely right. At times when funding is scarce, there is greater need to partner and leverage each other's expertise. It is really time to map out the resources we collectively have and understand the role that and expertise we each have to find ways to work collaboratively and advocate jointly for the best outcomes of our clients. I'll give you an example. So in BC, we have a well-funded employment program called Work BC. And the immigrant serving organization worked very closely with the employment service providers to map out some of the key barriers that newcomers can face, and in maybe there's some gaps in work visa services. So we intentionally got together to understand, okay, there is this well-funded program providing wealth of supports, but we might not see newcomers actually go and get the benefits. Why is it? And we were able to successfully advocate with the funders to change the eligibility definitions and the type of services to ensure that newcomers don't fall through the cracks. So now work visa services are open to refugee claimants. Refugee claimants can come and seek services and get support in getting employment. They made language training an eligible expense when helping newcomers achieve the language levels that are needed to participate in skills training programs. And these are just a few examples of what's possible when we work together on identifying the barriers, on mapping out what services are there, and advocating together. The reality is not-for-profit sector is very dependable on government funding, and social services should be funded by the various levels of government. And I know all our organizations are looking at other ways to get funding. We all look to diversify from government funds. We fundraise, and we start social enterprises, and we seek corporate sponsorships. But even the most successful organizations, even they are not able to replace the scale of government funding needed for providing robust services. The additional funding that we generate usually serves to pilot new ideas, to showcase what works and apply for government funding. It might work to augment existing service or potentially a stopgap between funding cycles. So we should just need to be realistic, as we are focusing on securing funding outside and the effort it takes to secure funding outside of government. Just let's be realistic what we can accomplish and not lose track that, yes, you need to focus on having some flexible funding through these sources, but you also need to put your energy into diversifying your government sources of funding and not really dependent on the one key funder, exploring how your services can be relevant for other ministries that you have not considered as core funders in the past. So I think we will need to be more creative and branch out from the traditional funders that we've built those relationships and we learn to rely on.
Well, as we wrap up our discussion, I wonder if you have any final words of advice to nonprofits and charities who might be listening on how to navigate these very changeable and difficult times.
It's a difficult time for all of us. We are at MOSAIC going through strategic planning, and one of the things that is coming very loud and clear as a priority is something that we need to boost is our agile decision making. How do you make decisions in the environment? Everything changes so fast. How do you assess risks? Historically, not-for-profits are very focused on services. Like we put all the energy and efforts into serving clients and making our services the best. We don't necessarily look at our organizational stability and resilience. And those are the things I think we need to strengthen, because there's a lot of people that depend on social service organization and will continue to depend. So how do we as an organization also build our own capacity to manage change in these times, to be able to do appropriate decision-making and risk assessment, because we'll have few resources. We need to use them in the best way that provide the highest return on our investment. And we need to be very selective what we pursue. So what is our process to get to the decisions? And I think that's part that our sector is now looking at. How do we strengthen our ability to do that and pivot as we need to, based on really like thoughtful decision-making and understanding the risks ahead.
Well, Olga, it's so good to speak with you, to gain your insights into this extraordinary period of time that's so seriously impacting Canada, newcomers to Canada, and our own societal views and our economy. It really helps us better understand the challenges facing Canadian nonprofits on the ground and in the community, and it's so valuable in providing actionable advice to our audience of nonprofit professionals. Thank you for the important work that you do and for joining us on CharityVillage Connects.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and to all my fellow leaders in the sector, I wish you a lot of strength. I wish you a lot of patience, and I want to ask all of you to take care of yourselves, because there is a lot of work ahead of us. and we need to continue to have a healthy and strong social service sector.